Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, testing.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you. So the February financial statements were presented at the board meeting, so I'm going to focus today on the March financial statements, which are obviously more current. And just to look at the balance sheet, just a couple things to highlight on the balance sheet. We're seeing that cash and investments are up about 12.5 million over the prior year, and that's predominantly due to the increase in the ad valorem revenues that we received this year, which was an increase of about $5.7 million. And then the other thing to just highlight on the balance sheet is the net pension liability. I just wanted to indicate that the change from the prior year, which is 5.1 million, to the current year, which is 2.2, is a reduction of $2.9 million, and that's because we recognized a net pension benefit at the end of the audit at September 30, 21. So that's reflected in when we're looking at comparative financial statements. And then if you wanted to look at the revenue,
Laura, just for clarification, was that largely due to, I mean, I know it's actuarial things, you know, I'm not going to try to pretend to walk into actuarial land, but would the most significant impact on that have been that FRS's fund, their investment performance was so good that even with, obviously with increasing pension requirements, but that the investments
yes,
went up at a higher rate?
that's exactly it. They recognize net pension actuarial gains.
Okay.
And so that resulted in reducing the liability. And they take a look at that. We don't record that on a monthly basis. We true it up at the end of the audit when we get the information from FRS. But when you're looking at comparative statements every month, it kind of looks a little weird. But you're exactly right. It was because they recognized actuarial gains. Good question. On the revenue and expense side, just pointing out that we are 6 months into the fiscal year with the period ended March 31, 2022. And of course, on the revenue side, we get the revenues all up front. So this is on a modified cash basis, this presentation. So you're seeing that we've recorded all the revenues, or the bulk of all the revenues year to date. And looking at the expenses, just pointing out that the reimbursements are about a month behind. So the agencies would request their reimbursements for March in April. So these would be reflective of that as well. So if you're looking at a 5-month reimbursement period, that would be about 42%, and we are at 30.7% of our expenditure budget. So although we're spending more than what our year-to-date budget, and the year-to-date budget is, we try to take an average. I think I had mentioned maybe a year or so ago, we used to just take a 1/12, and I didn't like that approach. So what Lynn has been doing is she's been actually looking at the actual spend by program area and taking a 3-year average, because some of the programs spend their money in the summer, some of them spend it in the fall, and so to try to make it a little more comparative. And so that's the methodology that we've been doing. Just to kind of keep track of it during the year. But for year to date, we've spent 23.5 million compared to 19.8 from a year ago. So we're spending more, but we're still only at 30% of our annual budget, which 5 months in would be around 42%. And then also included in your packet is the budget actual charts. There's a few charts, as well as we always present with you the contracts that were signed in this month, as well as any budget transfers that were made. And then we are also required to present our investment report on a monthly basis, and this is showing the breakdown of our investments. The thing to just point out is in our investment pools, and we've had discussions about that, but right now at a snapshot of March 31, we are holding about 63.5% of our funds in the pools, which is below our policy. And I think I had mentioned earlier when we did have the discussion about whether or not to raise that percentage, is that it comes into play more at the beginning of the year when we were sitting on a lot of money that we get from the county in November, and then we don't spend it down until the rest of the year. But this is showing you, and again, our earnings are very nominal. Our year-to-date earnings of $43,900. We had even reduced our budget a year ago to $100,000, but you know, it is what it is. So any questions on the financial statements? Be happy to answer.
our FY '23 budget, funding parameters, and multi-year budget forecast for '23-'27. Discussion on that, and we're going to open it up for us.
Absolutely. So the Finance Committee is here today to discuss the current fiscal '23 budget funding parameters and to make recommendations to the board at the June 9th meeting, where staff will be presenting the proposed fiscal '23 annual budget. At the April 14th board meeting, board members had the opportunity to review the fiscal '23 key budget assumptions. We have updated the attached forecast scenarios, which we labeled most likely and worst case, from the April board meeting for additional information that has been obtained. So just to kind of go over the high-level parameters, most of you were at that meeting, but just to remind you on the property values, there has been no additional information that we have received from Pinellas County. Their forecasted projections are now scheduled to be held in May of 2022. We will receive the preliminary certified values on June 1st, 2022, and then we will receive the certified taxable values on July 1st, 2022. So these assumptions and projections that you have before you, there's been no change to the property value increases that we had initially used for the forecast, and we had included a 6.8% property value increase for fiscal '23. We know with the current housing market, the property values are increasing, but the question is how long will that continue? We had mentioned at the board meeting that we found that the average home taxable value for 2021 in Pinellas County had increased 8%, which was about $11 per average home taxpayer, which increased from about $146 to $147 per taxpayer, and that's with no change in the millage rate back in '21. So our current forecast reflects a millage rate of 0.8981. And at the board meeting, we were asked to run a few numbers with the reduced millage. So I calculated a reduction in millage rate. I went back to 0.8550 for fiscal '23, and that would result in a decrease of revenues for fiscal '23 of approximately $4.3 million. And that sounds minor in comparison with our total budget, but I also projected gradually increasing that from to 0.860 and then 8.65 and then 8.7 and then 8.75, just to gradually kind of increase that if we were to take a reduction. And what that would do, keeping everything else the same as far as what our most likely projections and forecasts were, is that would bring our unreserved fund balance down to a 2% reserve, which is well below our 8.3% target. And what that would mean then is we would have to take a hard look at reducing program allocations, reducing staff, and that would be a little difficult in light of our current strategic plan, but we certainly are here at the pleasure of what the board and the Finance Committee would like us to do. So in reviewing the key assumptions, we've talked about COLAs. So this forecast has been updated to reflect a COLA of 10.2%, and that's up from 9%, which is what we had presented at the board meeting, and that would be on personnel costs, personnel salaries. That reflects the most current information that we have received, which is for the 12-month period ending March 2022. We're all very well aware of the current inflation affecting food, housing, insurance, and energy, and this forecast projection adjusts the COLAs back down. So we've gone with 10.2 for fiscal '23, but then we've adjusted it down to 7 and then 6, and then we've leveled out at 3 going forward, not knowing where the crystal ball will fall. In looking at program COLAs, we continue to analyze how to allocate COLAs to the programs, and this forecast includes a 10.2% COLA for all eligible programs on their non-personnel budgets, notwithstanding lapse. In the past, we've always taken a look at lapse and done a calculation based on where they fell with lapse. And in the 2 years prior to now, we've kind of considered that to be an outlier because of all the COVID restrictions as far as spending those monies. So this was a different approach that we took. We have also factored a 3% COLA increase on all of their personnel budgets. So that's a total COLA budgeted amount that we have in the forecast of million. Speaking of workforce stabilization, we had approved $1 million increase in fiscal '22 at the last board meeting, and that included 20 programs. The previous forecast that we looked at the board meeting included workforce stabilization budgeted of $4.4 million in fiscal '23. We have now budgeted $4.7 million for that based on some additional information that we've gotten. So that's gone up slightly. The capital RFA remains unchanged at 1.75. And our future programming previously forecasted was $7.9 million, which included about $6.5 million for the LOIs. The current forecast you have in front of you, we have reduced that amount to $5.275 million in fiscal '23 and have spread the balance of that out to fiscal '24. Staff felt like it was more realistic when onboarding all of these programs that it would, to align with the strategic plan, that some of it would more than likely fall into the fiscal '24 year as opposed to all of it hitting fiscal '23. No changes in the additional staff line item, and I would welcome discussions on the revenue and the expenditure budget assumptions. We are postured to provide our funded agencies with their preliminary fiscal '23 allocation amounts next week for them to begin to put their budgets together that they will need to provide to us by the middle of June. So I'm happy to hear a discussion on either the revenue side and or the expense side.
I wanted to add something. I really want to give both Laura and definitely Karen Bogus and et al., and others, a lot of credit for the way in which we're already approaching inflation, if you will, in the workforce component of our agencies, as opposed to saying, this is inflation, here's fill in the blank, 10.2%, go at it. Instead, it's been a much more thoughtful approach where we created, the royal we, I didn't, those guys did, created sort of a questionnaire relative to what their issues were, what they could do, because just by giving the money doesn't necessarily mean they can do something that will make a difference. We want to make it more difference for kids. Ultimately, we want, for instance, more classrooms in early learning centers open and being able to take care of kids. And we know we've got literally shuttered classrooms as an example. So we're looking at how do we provide the service. And they made proposals to us of how within their constraints they could use funds to do things that would actually improve the stability, retention of their workforce, as well as recruitment of their workforce. And I don't know, Karen, you may want to give some flavor to just some of the differences. In some cases it was, we're going to increase salaries for the people who were in these rooms, and they could do that and therefore recruit and retain more people. But sometimes it was other things.
Right. In some cases, and I think I may have spoken to it at the last board meeting, although I wasn't present via remote, but in some cases, because I think over, there were challenges with behaviors prior to the pandemic, but since the pandemic and families dealing with all kinds of complex situation and kids coming to those programs, carrying a lot of that with them. And so in some cases, it was also shoring up staff, to, of course, meet licensing ratio, but additional staff that were needed to address any burnout issues and also behavior issues that were being experienced. In addition to that, how agencies are recruiting is a little bit different, and amping up that process, and of course salary increases were included in that. And if there were any other trainings or any other educational opportunities for the staff to, again, increase the quality of programming that they're providing and helping them have different strategies in their toolbox to deal with some of the situations that they're facing.
So I'm remembering things like assistant directors at a center, so
Yes.
that, we don't typically think of, and you go to the principal's office when you're in preschool, but oh yes. And, you know, and also for that person to be able to step in and be an additional presence in the classroom if one kid needs a whole lot of attention, or be there when somebody's ill or has other
Yeah,
issues.
substitute pool. I mean, I
Right.
think that's, one of the big things that we see because of everything that has happened over the last 2 years. If a teacher doesn't come in, everyone's scrambling to try to figure out where do the kids go, and they have to adhere to our, licensing and quality pieces. And so having more depth to be able to address and have everything that they need, especially with staffing on site. So.
Okay, any other discussion? Anybody else?
Just some food for thought. In some of the conversations I've had with local realtors and the like, they're not seeing any reduction in sight. They're not seeing a rollback. They expect, and we happen to be, I think it was just in the paper recently, that we're one of the largest growth areas, if not the largest area. And Tampa Bay area has been the, in housing and growth of people moving in. So they're not expecting to see a lot of reduction. Whoops. What was this? Increase by 7.6, okay, there you go. 7.6% increase in property values. They're expecting to see that. The same token, we are living probably in, if not the highest, but one of the highest in the country as far as inflation is concerned. So we're playing, I hate to say this as we look at it, but we're playing both sides of the fence. And every time we think about, when we are coming out of it, it was COVID before. Now we're into this dilemma. We haven't seen this before. So decisions that we're making and will be made here are going to be first-timers. They're going to be very different. I think we all had, as of last year, the board was very adamant in looking at reductions and providing taxpayers with some relief. I think you got to really weigh these two factors right now and say whether there's a real relief, if that's prudent to do at this time. So as I ask you to, as I'm just kind of throwing it out for your thoughts, those are two very, very different and very opposite components of your thinking process that you have to take into consideration. And I'm just not. There's no really easy answer to it. I personally agree with staff that we should just stay the course at this point, even though I know that I was just as adamant as everyone else that we wanted to make that reduction. But times are different, and things are changed, and we're going off into some new territory that none of us have experienced in our lifetime. So just a thought.
I will state again what I said at the board meeting. I, along with the rest of the board, assumed that we would be looking at a rollback, but I am of the mindset that we should not make a change right now or roll back our millage rate for 2023. I don't think it's something that we should put it on the table for future years. But I think the volatility of what we have, but for me personally, in addition to that, it's that we want to be aggressive with our strategic plan implementation. We don't want to back down on that. We do not want to back down on programming. This is not the time to do that in the foreseeable future. So I'm pretty strong in my opinion that we do not approach a rollback rate for this budget and stay the course as staff has suggested.
Okay, well, I wholeheartedly agree with both of you. And we're in kind of a weird time. We're looking at the future because we're not sure what it holds right now. I will actually just read a thing down some housing markets in other areas outside of Tampa Bay in the state and in the U.S. They're starting to feel the pinch a little bit. So they're starting to see some adjustment because interest rates are going up, which means those home values are not as high as they would have been because people can't afford that anymore. It's not a 2% loan, it's a 5% loan or higher. And so that price of that house, which means eventually that you're going to see the adjustment's going to keep kicking down. And sooner or later, Tampa Bay is going to be in that realm. When? Nobody knows. I mean, We don't have a crystal ball. We don't know when that's going to happen. And obviously, by looking at what rollback did, as far as the numbers were, that was not good for our programs, our community, our people. That would be a true reduction in services, and that is not what we're here for. Our goal is to increase services as much as possible, reach as many children as we possibly can reach. At least in my mind, my opinion, that's where we're at, and I think the board is there as well, but I certainly support staying where we're at and not looking at any rollbacks at this time, as far as I go. Any other discussion?
Well, I'll agree with all.
One more point that I think it just fits with everything you're saying. Look at where the money's coming from as far as the new housing and build out. It's not, these are people who are moving from the Northeast and from the Midwest, all who have been impacted already. And they have funds, their investments are high. There's not a whole lot, at least from what I'm seeing in the St. Pete area and even Gulfport and South St. Pete, where the actual movement has really been people with money who are investing and buying properties and either moving here from somewhere else, but it's more cash deals that are actually starting to happen, which aren't impacted. So that's why I think to some extent we're not seeing that downturn yet. Will it come? I don't know, but I agree with everything that everyone said. We've got to keep our eye on it, but change today for the sake of change, or reduction is probably not the right idea.
I think a lot of people don't realize that the old timers like myself that haven't had much of an increase in taxes because we have the save our home caps. But for the new first-time home buyers, they're coming in at that above rate. And for those new apartments that are being built, they're coming in at that above rate. So, I mean, it's sad. I mean, you do have transferable homestead. You can transport your deductions to another home. But traditionally, the new first-time home buyers and the people coming from up north are getting slammed. And the people that are renting houses out, there is no control on how high their taxes can go. So this is a whole dynamic that's so very, very weird. I think personally, if we can maintain our services at 4.8% increase on taxable value, and if we're looking at a 5.2, and if it actually goes to 7.6, there is a potential of rolling back. So I mean, that should always be in our hat. That yeah, if we can continue at 4.2 or 4.8%, and it rolls to 7.6%, we could be heroes. So that's just something I want to keep in mind.
Just a few kind of smaller things or sort of the texture of what's going on at JWB. Besides something really important tomorrow, we have, I guess I should headline with that. We will have our 75th anniversary luncheon, and last I knew it was sold out, which is hard to do in the Coliseum, but it's done. A lot of good things, and I won't step on any of them. Mike will be at the podium doing some fun things, and I get to share some of our history and lift up some people who are the sons and daughters, the grandsons and daughters of some of the folks who made JWB a reality. So it's always nice to be able to lift up in a variety of ways those folks and remind them that their granddad was way cool, or whatever. The other thing I would just mention, I mentioned just in passing to the chief, was that we will be kind of entering another phase, if you will, of how we work in person or remotely. It'll be effective June 7th, which is the Tuesday, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the Monday's, the prior week is Memorial Day, and we thought Memorial Day week is not the best week to start any of that. But you're starting to see people kind of beginning to do it anyway. So more people are physically coming into the office for this or that. The policy really says that we will be doing this from time to time for, right now, not for all staff meetings, because we don't have a place for all staff to sit, should they want to stay here past a meeting, but that the departments and units will come back for in-person meetings, that all of this really at the discretion of the chief. So, Laura Brock can make one set of decisions and Barbara can make another set of decisions based on what the kind of work people do and what makes the most sense in working together. We also lift up really key sort of meetings that talk about the processes across the whole agency, where you've got a lot of people who are living in different silos who need to be together, understanding what each other does and why, so that we can, maybe we can do it better. Or we've got something we need to face, and it kind of takes an all hands on deck. By that, I mean across the organization and different skill sets. That there will be an expectation that some of those things will be in person. One of the things that we're doing, the county is in the process, I think, of doing this as well, is converting our other conference rooms to, I want to call them Zoom rooms, which isn't really right.
Hybrid meeting rooms,
Hybrid meeting rooms.
team rooms.
Yeah, and I can probably take a stab at it, but Laura Peel, why don't you describe it better than I would?
Yeah, basically, we're kind of following off what the county is doing. 5 of our other conference rooms will have what's called team rooms. They'll have consoles outside of the office, and you check in, or outside the conference room, you check in, and then there'll be cameras and microphones, and basically when a person speaks, it'll automatically go to them. You can go up on the board and draw. And what this allows us to do is have people who are outside the office and also people inside the office, so they can effectively meet. So it's really cool. I'm excited about it.
And that would be true whether it's JWB folks or it's outside
Yep,
folks who may be
yep.
part of our, part of that meeting. But I think many of us have experienced those meetings where you've got, 5 people in nice little blocks and you can see their face, and then you've got one block that's just, there are 3 people on the other side of the room somewhere, but you can't tell who they are, who's speaking. They're the best we could do. But we really think, particularly serving the entire county and having people from Tarpon Springs to Pinellas Point involved with the work that we do, that having the possibility of participating on a remote basis effectively is going to continue to support our work and support it well. So, we've been heading this direction. It shouldn't be a big shock to the system, but I think we, meaning really from the IT perspective, are supporting it well, which is a good thing. Those are the only couple things I really had. Tomorrow, I mean, there's been a lot of behind the scenes work to make sure tomorrow is a good thing and is exciting for everybody, and I think it will be. So.
I think we're all looking forward to tomorrow, so thank you. Thank you to all the staff, and everybody put a lot of work into that. We're looking forward to it. Okay, open agenda. Anybody have anything? What's that?
Yeah, the front door for FSI moved to PIMS on April 1st, and to say it has exceeded all expectations is an understatement. It has been amazing. We really worried it was a pretty short timeline to get there, but several things have occurred. PIMS really looked with fresh eyes at, okay, how could this be done with the goal of, as as quickly as possible, not only answering the phone and having that individual calling talk to a real person, but also having whatever their need was understood and met. And the fact that you've got folks who either are, come from a social service point of view or are surrounded by people with a social service point of view, they may, quote, just be answering the phone, but the person sitting next to them and the people supervising them and all the rest and are available to them are navigators, has meant that when somebody calls, very, very often their need is handled then and there, in a live basis, which far exceeded what we thought could happen. The number was changed, and we have spread that word in every way we knew how. What, I don't even know, what's the number right now? It's like 866, what? Okay, she'll come up with it. Sorry about that. I've had it sitting with me all the, at most meetings, and then I don't have it right now. Well, that's good.
Have we gotten any input from the community about the change?
Yeah, we have, and we've gotten amazingly good feedback from the families, and yes. And it's just a different mentality. They're not in a call center environment where the goal is to answer each call and move on. It's rather, when the phone rings, how can I help that family? Right here, right now. And we have not experienced what, we had some concern that every call that went to 211 that might have included a child was just immediately sent over to FSI Connects, which is kind of what this front door is being called. That's not or when calls have come over, they've been appropriate. So that has not been a problem, that the PIMS group has not been overwhelmed. They very intentionally set up a system where, if, for instance, there were two operators who were primarily responsible for doing this, the phone system, if those two were busy, it goes to a navigator. And so there's a pool of, 5 to 8 people that a phone call could go to. They also created a very simple online form that people could do 24/7 that is pretty easy, and also they can dump that information into the system that both PIMS uses, and I believe that's the system that Gulf Coast uses as well. So you've got less opportunity for data entry problems and issues. But most importantly, the families are getting somebody who listens and cares really fast, and also who's pretty knowledgeable on getting services or referrals put together. So what's the number?
The number is 727-888-4357, and the 4357 spells out help.
And so, yeah, I should have that on the tip of my tongue always. I'm embarrassed that I didn't, but. Absolutely. Yeah. We can absolutely do that. So, yeah, I think once we did it and once we saw how well it was working, we had that feeling of, why didn't we do this earlier? But, things happen.
It would be great to also get as much feedback. We can share with the board the feedback that we're getting about the quality and the value of the program now.
Yeah, it's been, it's only been three to 4 weeks, so, it's pretty early, but early feedback is still excellent.
Has already heard it.
Yeah.
But I also think it's nice to get independent feedback, and I know this sounds really silly, but, it might be possible to get a secret shopper. I used to do that with Big Brothers Big Sisters, just to get some authentic feedback. So just the thoughts.
I think we're getting some input from the secret shopper.
Yes. Not really, you know, Linda and Janine Avoli are the two folks on our staff who know this in their sleep, and they don't happen to be here, but I don't know whether, you know, whether anybody else has anything to add over there on our brain trust.
I've been on the meetings, and they're going very well. And the technology, as Beth mentions, it's in place. I feel good about it.
Okay, anything else?
The only thing I know we mentioned about tomorrow, April did tell me the number was approximately 600 that'll be at the
amazing.
event tomorrow. Is that amazing? Absolutely amazing.
That's amazing.
And it's a full program, so we made the decision that some of the program, mostly the stuff I'm doing, will be while people are eating. So, you know, I will not be offended that people are clanking their forks.
Right.
But there was no other way.
April and I were laughing because 90% of what I'm going to talk about tomorrow is I'm listing people's names of all the
Right.
people that are going to be there, all the dignitaries and politicians and the like. So that's really cool to see that, you know, we're actually getting that kind of, you know, well, I said that to her like jokingly, but then there's a few that don't. You know, but we also had to be careful as we were looking at it, saying, okay, we have to make sure that we say everybody that's going to be there and not even talk about that as an election year.
But I'd also, and I know the staff is really good at this, particularly Linda and April, but one of the issues when you have an event like this and you have someone at the podium is to make sure all the pronunciations of the names that are being spoken are done right. There's nothing that I remember attending an event that whoever was at the podium, and Mike, of course, will get it right, but it's not good. And so people that have been associated with JWB, we need to make sure we assign someone to do that. I'd be more than willing to do that. I've been around a long time, but just to make sure.
On those folks I was talking about, who are mostly family members with Cooperman Bogue and Malin Hollins, I asked for that extensively, and I said, yeah, give it to me phonetically as well. So
I was just going to add, you pointed out there's going to be 600 at the Coliseum, and so I would suggest that you might want to try to get there at a reasonable time, but I think you should have all gotten an email from April, and I don't want to speak out of line, but there is a reserved VIP parking lot area for you all, so you're not going to worry about that.
I will say April was a stickler for her timing and the things that we need to do. She's already announced, especially us that are going to speak, we have to be there at a certain time. And I've already, the people that are coming to my table and others, I've already said, you know, you're early. So, it wasn't unclear to me until April was the one who finally said, you know, explained it. I always thought that was a parking space. The parking lots there were specifically for the Coliseum and that's it. But apparently, people in the neighborhood park there as well. And it's okay because they don't have to pay for the on-street parking. So that's part of the issue is we might be dealing with to some extent, but hopefully not too much.
It will be better than Marriott down.
Oh, God, yes.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah. You don't get thrown out of Baycare's working like, yeah.
Okay, there's no other items. We move to adjourn. Thank you.